Darkness, the faint hiss of embers, crackling as if whispering secrets too sacred for mortal ears. A single trembling flame dances at the edge of the frame, painting the world in molten ambers and shadowed silhouettes. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to hold a spark of divinity in your very hands, to cradle pure, untamed fire and bend it to your will? Tonight, I invite you on a journey far beyond the cozy glow of your hearth, a journey into myth and mystery, where human hearts collide with immortal powers. Meet Arion, the half-god smith born of a mortal woman's humble longing, and the divine, forge of Hephaestus himself. From his first breath, he carried the scent of molten metal and the promise of unquenchable flame. But what is the price of wielding such a gift? How much of your own humanity are you willing to trade for a flicker? Of Olympus, under a blood-red sky, lightning carved runes of fire across the heavens. Down below, in a humble cottage on the edge of volcanic hills, a woman named Thalia labored at her loom by candlelight. Night after night, she dreamed of a child destined for greatness, even as the ground quaked beneath her feet. Then, on one storm-tossed eve, Hephaestus himself visited her in a dream, offering a spark of creation no mortal could refuse. When Arion emerged into the world, his cries were not those of fear but of triumph. His skin glowed faintly in the dim light, as if embers slept just beneath the surface. Farmers clutching their torches swore they saw tiny tongues of flame flicker from his newborn fists. Was this a blessing or a curse? As he grew, so did his power. At 7 years old, Arion bent iron rods with bare hands. By 12, he summoned lightning-hot sparks with a mere thought. The village blacksmith, an old stooped man, watched in awe, and with a flicker of dread, for every miracle carries its shadow, and every gift demands its price. Rumors of this extraordinary boy spread far and wide. Pilgrims trekked through forests, just to glimpse the forge where he trained, yet amid the admiration, darker whispers stirred. Olympus itself seemed unsettled. What happens when mortal ambition overleaps its bounds? Legends spoke of an eternal flame hidden in the heart of Hades, guarded by the monstrous three-headed hound Cerberus. They said that any who stole from the underworld paid with memories, with souls, even with their very names. Still, the lure of that inexhaustible fire burned hotter in Arion's veins than any mortal fear. Every myth asks us to choose. Will we chase dreams that scorch our wings, or will we remain safely grounded, content with the sparks we already possess? As you lean in, listening to the sizzling heat and imagining the roar of the forge, consider this. What would you sacrifice in pursuit of power? Stay with me until the very end, and by the final ember's glow, you may find that Arion's story reflects the fire you carry inside. Are you prepared to ignite your imagination? Beneath a sky torn open by jagged forks of lightning, the world trembled as though the heavens themselves were hatching a plan. Rain pounded against the thatched roof of Thalia's cottage in relentless sheets, each drop hissing as it met the hearth's warm glow. Inside, she sat at her spinning wheel, hands stained with flax and determination, weaving threads of destiny, even as thunder rattled the timbers around her. Night after night, that same storm had haunted her dreams, firelit runes dancing in the roaring sky, a hammer striking an invisible anvil, and a voice, deep and echoing, promising a destiny that transcended mortal boundaries. Was it madness to believe that a humble weaver could bear a child touched by the divine? As her labor began, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, rattling the candles' flickering flames and casting elongated shadows that writhed like living creatures. Thalia's breath came in ragged gasps, each contraction a reminder that she teetered on the edge of some unimaginable threshold. Midwives from the neighboring homesteads gathered at her side, their eyes wide with fear and reverence. They had heard the rumors of lightning-charged skies and strange whispers carried on the wind. they knew tonight was no ordinary birth. When at last Arion emerged, the air itself seemed to crackle in astonishment. His first cry was not a wail of weakness, but a clarion call of triumph, as though he dared the thunder to challenge him. His skin glowed with a soft luminescence, as though embers slumbered just beneath its surface. Tiny sparks winking to life whenever Thalia brushed her fingertips across his cheek. The midwives recoiled in awe. Even the oldest among them had never witnessed such a marvel. Outside the cottage, villagers clutching torches peered through the rain-darkened windows, rumors of a divine son spreading like wildfire in their hearts. Word of this extraordinary birth raced through the surrounding valleys and hamlets. By dawn, pilgrims had made pilgrimage to the hillside cottage, leaving offerings of copper nails and horseshoes at the door, tokens meant to anchor the boy's fiery spirit. They whispered of prophecies, that he would master flame itself, forge weapons to tame the wildest elements, or perhaps usher in an age of incandescent wonder, or cataclysmic ruin. In the uncertain light of morning, Thalia held her son close, his warm breath fluttering like a moth's wings against her collarbone. She marveled at the tiny hands that had split the storm, and wondered how many storms he would one day quell or unleash. As Arion grew, the boundaries between mortal and divine blurred. By his 3rd year, he would giggle at candles as though they were playthings, his laughter coaxing them into riotous dances of light. Visitors would sit in stunned silence as the boy waved his chubby arms and sent sparks spiraling upward, tracing fleeting patterns against the rustic walls. By 5, he could command the hearth's flame to coil into shapes, a serpent that slithered along the mantel, a bird that vanished in a blink, leaving only wisps of smoke behind. Yet for all his wonder, there was a shadow in his gaze, a flicker of something ancient stirring beneath youthful innocence. Behind those bright eyes lay dreams that no child should hold. On midnight walks through the village square, Arion would pause before the great iron brazier, pressing tiny palms to its glowing coals as if seeking communion. He seemed to listen to the crackling logs, as though they spoke secrets he alone could understand. And sometimes, late at night, when Thalia crept into his room, she found him wide awake, staring at the firelight dancing across the ceiling, lips moving in silent invocation. What voices whispered to him in those dark hours? What promises did the flames offer? Nearby, the village blacksmith, an old man named Dorian, whose life had been shaped by scorched steel and ringing hammers, watched with a mix of wonder and dread. He had spent decades forging plowshares and horseshoes, bending iron to his will through sweat and skill. Yet here was a boy who could shape metal without tools, whose fingertips glowed brighter than any forge. When Arion's laughter echoed through the smithy, Dorian felt a strange ache in his chest, as though his very craft was both honoured and obliterated by this child's raw power. He taught the boy to respect the furnace, to bow his head before the roaring blaze. Yet even he could not teach a whisper of humility to a soul born of thunder and spark. As the seasons turned, villagers began to speak of omens. Crops near the cottage thrived in emerald abundance, yet tendrils of wild vines clawed unnaturally toward the windows, as though drawn by the boy's inner fire. Chickens laid eggs aglow with a faint golden hue, and lanterns left unattended burned brighter than daylight. Some feared these miracles, seeing in them the stirrings of a force too potent for human hands. Others knelt on mossy stones in the woods, praying for protection, or pleading to be spared the day when flame would devour everything in its path. When Arion reached his 12th summer, the sky itself seemed to acknowledge his ascendance. During the Festival of the Ember, an ancient ceremony celebrating the bond between fire and humanity, the villagers built a great pyre at the hilltop. Torches flared in 1,000 palms, their glow reflected in hopeful faces. Thalia stood among them, heart awash with pride and terror in equal measure, as her son climbed the steps to place a single ember atop the blazing tower. He closed his eyes, murmured a word lost on mortal ears, and the pyre responded, not with A single conflagration, but with a symphony of controlled flames, weaving through the smoke like living ribbons of light. Gasps rose from the crowd, some in delight, others in disquiet. That night, the elder priest of the valley approached Thalia as she lingered by the last dying embers. His eyes, ancient and knowing, met hers with both kindness and warning. "He walks the line between worlds," the priest murmured, his voice barely louder than the crackle of the coals. "The forge that makes him strong may one day consume him, teach him restraint, or the flames will teach him a lesson far crueler." Thalia nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as though even her sorrow feared the boy's power. She carried Arian back to their cottage, where the hearth's glow felt smaller than ever, a quiet reminder that some fires burn beyond walls, beyond wills, and beyond warnings. In the hush that followed, Arian gazed back at the dying embers of the festival pyre. His reflection shimmered in the residual glow as he whispered, "I will forge my destiny, mother. No darkness can hold what flame has freed." And so the boy destined to tame the eternal fire stood at the threshold of legend, with the weight of prophecy pressing upon him. In his veins flowed molten promise and mortal doubt, forging an identity more complex than any blade. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, a single question hung in the morning air. When a spark can create worlds, can it also destroy them? Thus begins the tale of Arian, son of fire, born beneath stormed skies, cradled by flame, and destined to choose between creation's highest heights and destruction's darkest depths. In the coming chapters, we will follow him as he learns that every gift demands its price, and every flame, no matter how brilliant, must reckon with the shadows it casts. Are you ready to step into the forge with him? The first time Arian stepped into Dorian's smithy, the air hit him like a living thing. It was thick with heat and the tang of molten steel, each breath carrying the promise of creation and the threat of pain. Sparks danced like fireflies above the anvil, illuminated by the glow of coals so white-hot they seemed to hum with hidden power. The walls of the forge bore centuries of scars, charred beams, blackened stones, and rows of dulled hammers that whispered of countless battles won and lost in the shape of iron. Dorian, the master blacksmith, stood at the center of this inferno. His muscles rippled beneath soot-stained leather, and his eyes were steel beam sharp, honed by years of demanding respect from stubborn metal. When he first laid eyes on Arian, the boy's small frame shivering in the doorway, Dorian's gaze hardened. Apprentices were a dime a dozen, prone to burns and blisters, but this child radiated something different. There was no fear in his eyes, only a flicker of awe and a spark of challenge. "Step forward," Dorian commanded, voice low enough to rattle the rafters, yet firm enough to still the crackling coals. Arian obeyed, each footfall echoing against the stone floor. The roar of the forge seemed to welcome him, as though the very flames recognized a kindred spirit. Dorian grasped a length of heated iron with tongs and held it out. "Bend this," he said. "Without tools, just your hands." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at the boy's feet. Arian's heart pounded, but his fingers closed around the glowing rod. The heat licked at his skin, 1,000 pinpricks of fire. Yet he did not flinch. He pressed his palm against the searing metal, inhaled and exhaled. In that moment, time slowed. He felt the iron yielding beneath his touch, as if welcoming the shape his will imposed upon it. With deliberate pressure, he curved the rod into an elegant arc. The metal groaned in protest, sparks erupting like a miniature storm around his hand. Dorian's jaw loosened, surprise cracking through his rugged composure. "By the gods," he muttered, stepping back. "Show me that again." Each day at dawn, Arian returned to the smithy. The villagers whispered that the boy had sold his soul for this gift, but Thalia knew better. Arian's power was woven from love and longing, a mother's constant prayer and a divine spark. Under Dorian's watchful eye, Arian relearned the Fundamentals of the craft: stoking the fire to precise temperatures, hammering red-hot steel into flat sheets, folding metal for strength, and quenching blades in water so cold they hissed like serpents. Yet every lesson was tinged with something extraordinary: a whispered word, a flick of injured fingers, and the coals would dance higher. A whisper of breath, and the hammer itself seemed lighter. On the third week, Dorian brought out a simple, iron dagger, dull, pitted with rust, and centuries old. "Sharpen this," he said, handing Arian a whetstone. In the flickering torchlight, he watched the boy lay the blade's edge against the stone, but instead of sliding back and forth, Arian placed his palm flat against the metal. His eyes closed, and for a heartbeat the world stilled. When he opened them, the blade gleamed as though freshly forged, razor-thin, cool to the touch, and reflecting the forge's glow like liquid glass. Word of this miracle spread like wildfire. Soldiers returning from distant skirmishes came seeking this boy who sharpened blades with bare hands. Merchants caravanned through the village, offering gold in exchange for a single weapon, forged by Arian's flame-infused touch. Yet Dorian refused every offer, his pride and fear warring within him. He saw in the boy both a legacy and a threat, the ultimate testament to his craft, or its obsolescence. Training under Dorian was not without cost. Iron and flame test more than muscle. They reveal character. Early one morning, Arian collapsed. Across the cobblestones, sweat soaking his tunic and muscles trembling with exhaustion, Dorian knelt beside him, eyeing the boy's scorched arms and blistered palms. "Rest," he ordered softly. "A true smith knows the balance of work and healing." As Arian lay beneath a willow by the river, his mind drifted to the whispers he had heard at night. Rumors of Olympus's disapproval, rumors of vengeance. What if Zeus's wrath did not stop at bronze and steel? What if the gods themselves came to claim their wayward son? He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on mastering the forge's rhythm. Inhale the heat, exhale resistance, shape the metal, then shape oneself. By midsummer, Arian had progressed beyond simple blades and horseshoes. He crafted a lantern whose flame burned without oil, suspended in mid-air by a ring of forged silver. He wove fireplace grates that glowed with an inner light, banishing shadows without so much as a single ember. Yet with each triumph, a subtle unease grew within Dorian's heart. The fire in Arian's hands was beautiful, but too beautiful to belong to a mortal boy. One afternoon, Dorian presented Arian with a challenge nearly impossible: forge a shield from starlight. Not literal starlight. Rather, he handed the boy an obsidian round, sharp enough to shave and smooth as glass. "Bend this into a shield," Dorian demanded, uncertain whether Arian could transform the brittle stone into protective steel. The sword and shield motif was a legend among forgers. Only the gods themselves could transmute stone into metal. Arian touched the obsidian, and for a moment his fingers glowed like smouldering coals. He pressed his palm against the pitch-black circle, and the obsidian cracked. But instead of shattering, it reformed. The stone's edges melted into molten brilliance, reshaping into a wide shield rimmed with silver filigree. When the metal cooled, the shield bore a mirror-like surface, reflecting faces as clearly as water on a lake. The villagers gasped as Dorian raised it aloft, its weight feather-light, its strength untested. When the burly blacksmith struck it, with a hammer, the metal rang like a bell, holding its form without a scratch. Dorian's eyes shone with equal parts pride and terror. "By Hephaestus," he whispered, "you carry his blood and his burden." From that day on, Dorian's lessons shifted. He no longer taught Arian how to forge. Rather, he taught him why. Beneath the roar of flames, he spoke of the responsibility of power. How a misplaced strike can shatter bones. How unchecked ambition can consume a soul. How the finest steel cracks without humility. He told Arian stories of smiths who had created wonders and wrought disasters. blades so sharp they lacerated worlds, armor so strong it imprisoned hearts in tyrannical rule. Arian listened. He felt the gravity of each lesson deepen the ember in his chest. He practiced restraint, forging small trinkets by candlelight, tiny birds, leaves, and rings, objects devoid of grand purpose yet perfect in simplicity. With every creation, he reminded himself that the finest craftsmanship lies not in spectacle, but in intention. Yet the forge never rested, and the world outside grew restless. Travelers whispered of omens, distant mountains rumbling with unheard echoes, constellations shifting as if realigning divine politics. The eternal flame still called to Arian, its heartbeat pounding in his veins. Each time he laid hammer to anvil, he felt its tug, a reminder that no mortal forge, however brilliant, could rival the fires that burned at the universe's core. One evening, as the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, Dorian summoned Arian to the forge's entrance. He held a battered helmet in his hands, a relic from a war long past, scored with gouges and chipped by countless battles. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin the greatest test of your apprenticeship. You will reforge this helmet into something worthy of legend. But be warned, legend, once born, has a will of its own." Arian nodded, chest tightening with anticipation. He knew that this trial would mark the threshold between the boy who mastered flame and the hero, or monster, he might become. As Dorian handed him a length of iron, Arian felt the familiar thrill of heat against his fingertips. In the forges, glow, mother and mentor, mortal and god, all converged in that single moment of possibility. The hammer waited, the anvil stilled. And in the heart of the forge, a new legend began to take shape, born of sweat, sparks, and a destiny that would test every ounce of Arian's metal. Beneath the towering pines that skirted the village, a hush fell each twilight, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Smoke from hearth fires curled upward, carrying the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread. But in Dorian's smithy, a different aroma prevailed. Ozone and embers. Word had spread beyond the fields and wagons. That boy, Arian, could tame flame. Yet all such marvels reached farther than mortal ears, stirring whispers in the gilded halls of Olympus. It began with dreams. Late at night, Arian found himself wandering through marble columns lit by an unearthly glow. A chorus of distant voices sang in a language older than time, a melody that resonated in his bones. In those nocturnal visions, he saw a grand council, Zeus on his throne carved from storm clouds, Hera draped in peacock feathers, and Hephaestus limping forward with a hammer that glowed like a dying star. They spoke of balance and of boundaries, of mortals who dared trespass on divine domains. Then, as thunder rolled in the dream sky, a single flash revealed Arian's face among them, and a hush fell so deep it rang in his ears. When dawn broke, he woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a smith's hammer. The forge outside his window seemed quieter somehow, as if it too awaited word from above. Thalia found him at the hearth before the sun rose, eyes wide and haunted. He recounted, his vision, voice low and trembling. She pressed a hand to his cheek, feeling the warmth still pulsing beneath his skin. "They speak to you," she whispered. "The gods are watching." Arian closed his eyes, tasting ash and ambrosia on his tongue. "And I must answer." As summer ripened, omens trickled into the waking world. During the solstice ritual, a firelit ceremony honoring Hestia, flames at the holy hearth leapt high enough to scorch the roof tiles. Elder priestesses crossed themselves, murmuring of divine displeasure. In the marketplace, metal merchants discovered that blades forged by Arian carried faint divine runes along their edges, runes no mortal hand had ever carved. Kingsmen sent envoys to purchase these weapons, but Dorian, trembling with newfound dread, refused every golden offer. Above, Clouds gathered in unnatural patterns. Constellations shifted overnight, leaving scribes scrambling to update star charts. Travelers spoke of a winged figure, half man, half hawk, swooping low over the woods at dusk, casting shadows like harbingers. Some called him Apollo's messenger, others feared he was a sentinel of Zeus himself, dispatched to guard the boundary between man and God. One evening, as Arion stoked the coals, he heard a soft whistle overhead. He looked up. Hammer paused, mid-swing, and saw a slender bird of bronze gliding between branches. Its feathers were metallic, each quill tipped with a flicker of flame. It landed on the forge's lintel, head tilting in curiosity, and fixed him with an eye like molten gold. Arion approached slowly, embers dancing across his palm, and extended a finger. The bird hopped forward and pecked gently at the heat, steam swirling around its beak. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it took off, leaving behind a single charred feather that glowed with an inner light. Dorian, called by the commotion, entered with a lantern in hand. He found his apprentice kneeling before the feather, cradling it as though it were the heart of a fallen star. "What have you done?" he asked, voice trembling between awe and fear. Arion handed him the feather. It pulsed in Dorian's palm like a living ember. "It came from the sky," Arion said. "A message." The old smith closed his eyes, remembering warnings he had heard in half-forgotten legends. When heaven's fire descends, mortal hands must not grasp it. Over the following nights, whispers grew louder. Traders from Ephesus arrived with ivory chests filled with gifts, gold coins, scented oils, and garments inlaid with tiny silver flames. They pleaded for Arion's service. "Forge us armor that the sun cannot pierce," one proclaimed. "Sharpen swords that cut through shields as if they were paper," another vowed. And yet all left empty-handed, for Dorian and Thalia had agreed. No mortal coin could purchase a power granted by gods. Then came the day the thunder god himself chose to speak. Arion was in the smithy's deepest recess, extinguishing the last coals of the day, when the ground shuddered. A roar like rolling boulders filled the air, and the forge door burst open, hurled aside by an invisible force. Flames flared as though struck by lightning, illuminating the cavernous interior in a white-hot brilliance. Arion shielded his eyes, feeling electricity crackle across his skin. When he dared to look again, a figure stood among the sparks, a titan of a man, crowned with storm clouds, cloak billowing like thunderheads. Zeus's voice boomed, shaking the rafters. "Arion, son of woman and god, you trespass on realms beyond your making. The flame you wield is not yours to command." His finger crackled with lightning as he pointed to the anvil. "Strike it, and I will show you the weight of divine wrath." Arion's blood ran cold, but his heart beat with defiant fire. "I do not seek to rival Olympus," he called, voice steady despite the storm. "I only ask to master the gift I was born with." The hammer lay within reach, its handle worn smooth by generations of smiths. He stepped forward, each footfall an act of courage, and grasped it. Zeus's eyes narrowed. "Then prove your humility. Forge this hammer into a new weapon, one that serves both gods and men. If you fail, the flames you command will consume your soul." Silence fell as heavy as molten lead. The forge's heat pressed against Arion's chest, drawing a bead of sweat from his brow. He closed his eyes, remembering Dorian's lessons, Thalia's gentle touch, and the countless nights spent coaxing magic from glowing coals. He inhaled, breathing in smoke and resolve, then lifted the hammer high. Sparks erupted in a shower of starlight as he brought it down upon the anvil. With each blow, the air sang with power, an alloy of human will and divine essence. The hammer's head melted and reformed, its shape shifting from tool to symbol, a balanced mallet whose face bore Olympus's lightning bolt intertwined with a mortal's laurel wreath. Sweat and blood mingled on Arian's brow, but he struck on, driven by purpose rather than pride. When the final blow rang, the forge fell quiet, and Zeus himself stepped forward to examine the creation. The hammer glowed softly, humming with contained energy. "You have honored the gift," he intoned, voice now distant as thunder receding into the clouds. "Use it wisely." With that, he vanished, leaving behind nothing but a distant echo and the faint scent of ozone. As days passed, the villagers spoke of the miracle in hushed tones, how Arian had faced the king of gods and emerged unscathed, how the hammer he forged could shape destinies without destroying souls. Yet even as admiration swelled, a new question troubled Arian's mind. What price lay hidden in Zeus's blessing? One night, in the quiet after the forge's final glow had died, Thalia found her, son standing at the edge of the hill, the silver and gold hammer resting against his shoulder. He stared into the valley below, where lights flickered like distant stars. She stepped beside him, her hand finding his. "You have done what few mortals dare," she said softly. "But what will you do now?" Arian looked down at the hammer, its runes pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "I will walk the path between worlds," he answered. "I will forge weapons that protect, not destroy, and I will prove that a mortal, guided by fire and humility, can stand among gods without fear." Together, they gazed at the horizon, where pine shadows merged with storm clouds. Somewhere beyond, Olympus awaited. And as the first light of dawn ignited the sky, Arian felt the weight of his destiny settle into his grip, a destiny shaped by whispers of Olympus, forged in fire, and destined to blaze across the annals of myth. Beneath a moonlit sky, the path to the underworld lay hidden beneath a canopy of ancient oaks whose branches intertwined like gnarled fingers. Arian approached the threshold with Dorian's enchanted hammer strapped to his back and Thalia's whispered prayers echoing in his heart. He carried with him a small brazier filled with coals stolen from the forge, coals still warm with the breath of Olympus, and a single vial of water drawn from the river Styx. No mortal map could guide him here, only the riddles woven in old prophecies and the cryptic directions of Hermes himself. When he arrived at the moss-covered archway carved into the hillside, the air grew colder than any winter chill. A low mist curled around his boots, as if alive, tugging at his ankles and beckoning him forward. He paused, raising the brazier to illuminate the runes etched into the stone, words in a language half erased by time, promising passage for those who carried flame and truth. With a steady breath, Arian set the brazier on the ground and traced each rune with the tip of his finger. The coals flared, bathing the archway in a ghostly glow, and the runes gleamed into clarity. "Speak the name you would surrender, and the gate shall open." A hush fell. Arian closed his eyes and whispered, "I offer my name, Arian, son of Thalia and Hephaestus, in service of the eternal flame." The words tasted of steel and salt on his tongue. Behind him, the coals dimmed, then roared to life as a deep rumble shook the earth. The moss-covered stones slid aside like waking giants, revealing a spiraling staircase of black basalt that descended into darkness. Each step carried a weight heavier than iron. The only light came from the brazier, its flames dancing across, slick walls streaked with mineral veins. Shadows stretched and flickered, giving shape to unseen horrors, visions of lost souls, half-formed and wailing in silent torment. The closer Arian drew to the underworld's core, the more the air thickened, tasting of ash and old regrets. At its bottom lay a vast cavern, vast as a winter night sky and twice as dark, punctuated only by the hush of trickling water. There, chained to a column of obsidian, lay Cerberus, 3 heads of snarling magnificence, each a masterwork of fang and fury. The great hound's eyes glowed like molten gold, and its breath billowed steam, creating bubbles in the shallow river that circled its prison. Arian stepped forward, brazen resolve burning in his chest. He lifted the brazier high, sending sparks into the cavern's gloom. Cerberus's head snapped toward him in unison, each jaw parting to reveal rows of dagger-sharp teeth. Yet the beast did not advance. It stood bound, as though it awaited more than mere trespassers. From the shadows emerged a robed figure, light on its feet despite the cavern's slick stones. Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger, descended on wings of laughter and wind. His sandals whispered secrets to the floor, and his caduceus glowed faintly in the brazier's reflection. He regarded Arion with curious amusement. "So, the mortal who wields flame comes seeking the eternal flame," Hermes intoned, voice like wind chimes in a storm. "Do you know what price must be paid?" Arion met his gaze, heart hammering but fear forgotten. "I know the legends," he replied, "that to steal from the underworld, one must offer what they hold dearest. I am prepared." Hermes smiled, an expression both kind and inscrutable. "Very well. You may face Cerberus. If you can calm its fury, the way to the flame will open. But be warned, this is no trial of brute force. Cerberus reflects the soul of its challenger. You must prove that your heart's fire is pure." With a flick of his wrist, Hermes dissipated the chains binding Cerberus. The great hound rose, its 3 heads snarling, eyes fixed on Arion like searing coals. The brazier trembled in Arion's grip, yet he stood his ground, recalling Dorian's lesson that true strength is born of restraint. He lowered the brazier, letting its warmth bathe Cerberus in amber light. Then, slowly, he knelt and set it before the creature's 3 heads. His voice came soft, steady. "Cerberus, guardian of souls, I come not to harm, but to honor the balance between life and death. Accept my flame as tribute and grant me passage." Cerberus advanced, first head snapping at the brazier's rim, second head leaning to inhale its smoke, third head sniffing the ground around Arion's kneeling form. Each head's eyes revealed a facet of his spirit: courage, hunger for power, and fear of loss. The cavern echoed with low growls that rattled the stalactites overhead. Rather than drawing the enchanted hammer, Arion placed a hand over his heart and closed his eyes. He whispered a prayer to Thalia and Hephaestus, to every quiet voice that guided him here. The brazier's flames flickered, dancing in a silent rhythm with his pulse. Slowly, he folded his other hand across his chest, a gesture of peace and confession. In that moment, a hush fell. Cerberus paused, its snarling breath fading to a rumble of contemplation. One head lowered to rest its chin on the brazier's rim. The second nudged Arion's shoulder gently, and the third exhaled a puff of warm air across his bowed head, and intimate acknowledgement of shared fire. Hermes watched with a delighted glimmer in his eyes. "You have done what few mortals can. You have tamed the guardian with empathy, not steel. The path is yours." As if in answer, the cavern's far wall shattered, cracks spreading like lightning across obsidian, until the stone dissolved into motes of glowing dust. Beyond lay a chamber alight with a single column of pure white flame, suspended above a stone plinth. The eternal flame pulsed like a heartbeat, casting long shadows that writhed across the walls. Arion rose, every muscle humming with triumph and wonder. He approached the plinth, feeling the pull of the flame's limitless heat. Lifting the enchanted hammer, he drew the powder-white coals from the brazier and placed them in a shallow iron bowl beside the plinth. Then he reached into his satchel, drawing the vial of Styx water, its surface shifting like liquid moonlight, and poured a few drops onto the coals. They hissed, turning from ember red to a spectral blue, revealing ethereal runes that swirled. Around the flame's base, the eternal flame responded, its pillar stretching skyward, crackling with a resonance that vibrated through Arion's bones. He knew that to carry this fire back to the world above, he would have to bind it to Dorian's hammer. That act would seal his fate, granting him power unmatched, yet forever tying his spirit to the underworld. With resolute calm, Arion set the hammer's head atop the flame's base, aligning its runic carvings with the spectral glyphs dancing. On the bowl, sparks leapt between metal and flame in a silent symphony, each one singing of sacrifice and renewal. The runes on the hammer glowed, forging a bond between mortal craft and divine essence. A shockwave of radiant heat burst outward, extinguishing the brazier and casting Arion in pure white brilliance. He felt his name burning away, the price of this gift. Memories rippled at the edges of his mind, moments of laughter, of first words, of Thalia's lullabies. He clutched the hammer tightly as the memories faded like dying embers, accepting the trade with quiet grace. When the light receded, Arion found himself standing at the forest's edge, the night sky overhead crisp and silent. In his hand blazed the eternal flame, trapped within the hammer's head, a single stroke of molten gold against steel. The runes etched along its face glowed with promise and peril. He looked down to find the brazier's coals gone and the vial of Styx water empty. The entrance to the underworld was no more than unbroken earth. A soft rustle warned him of Hermes' departure. The messenger god's voice drifted on the night wind. Go now, son of flame. You have paid the price. May you bear your burden wisely. As Arion strode back toward the village, each step carried the weight of what he had sacrificed, and the power to reshape the world above. The eternal flame pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a living testament to empathy's triumph over fear, and to the mortal courage that dared to touch the boundaries of death. In the silent hush of the forest, one question remained. When you pay the price of forgetting, what is the true cost of power? And in the hammer's glowing runes, Arion held the answer he would carry for the rest of his days. Steam still curled from the molten iron of the forge where Arion had tested his metal, but his heart beat to a different rhythm now, an echo of distant drums and wings. He stood at the edge of a windswept plateau, the eternal flame trapped within the enchanted hammer's head, its glow like a second sun against the gathering dusk. Behind him, the world of mortals lay silent, unaware that fate itself balanced on his next choice. A sudden gust rattled the talisman at his belt, a caduceus-shaped medallion, Hermes' parting gift after the trial of Cerberus. As he touched it, the air shimmered, and a slender figure emerged from the haze. Hermes, messenger of the gods, draped in shadow and starlight. His winged sandals hovered inches above the ground, and his eyes sparkled with mischievous curiosity. You have bested beasts and braved death itself, Hermes said, voice like quicksilver slipping through gears. But one final challenge remains, the gamble of passage. Only if you win will the eternal flame remain yours to wield. Arion's pulse quickened. He had given up his name in the underworld. He had bartered memories for power. What more could the gods demand? Yet he nodded, steeling himself. Tell me the terms. Hermes' smile was both warm and inscrutable. From within his robe, he produced 2 identical flasks of gold, each etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dying light. Within one flask lies a drop of ambrosia, distilled from Olympus's highest summit. Drink from it, and you shall bear the flame without further cost, your memories and your soul intact. But gulp from the other, and you will lose your humanity entirely, your heart consumed by fire until nothing remains but ash. He held the flasks aloft, their rims winking in the breeze. Choose wisely. One flask is the elixir of blessing, the other the draught of doom. A hush fell as Arion studied the twin vessels. Neither bore a mark to distinguish it. The only clue lay in the runic script, written in the ancient tongue of the gods, characters he could not decipher. For a moment, he hesitated. The wind carried whispers of doubt. What if he guessed wrong? What if the price was more than he could bear? Then a thought struck him. True power is tempered by insight, not blind chance. He looked at Hermes, gauging the flicker in his eyes. "May I inspect them?" Hermes's grin widened. "But of course." He placed both flasks on a stone pedestal, their runes glowing softly. "You have 1 minute to choose. Use your wits." Arian knelt before the pedestal, fingertips brushing the bottle's smooth surfaces. He breathed deep, recalling every lesson: Dorian's hammering rhythms, Thalia's whispered lullabies, the hush of the underworld's cavern. He closed his eyes and channeled the calm he had learned to summon before Cerberus, the stillness that had bridged mortal fear and divine trial. Rather than trust sight or instinct, he chose to trust the flame itself. Placing his palm atop the hammer's head, he asked silently, "Guide me." A warmth spread from the runes, pulsing in a gentle thrum. Following that rhythm, Arian rose and touched the lip of the flask on the left. Its runes glowed brighter at his touch. He inhaled the scent of honeyed air and crushed petals rising from its narrow neck, a fragrance that spoke of sunrise on marble chessboards and laughter echoing off palace walls. It felt right. With steady resolve, he tipped the flask and drank. The liquid slid down his throat like liquid light, leaving a trail of warmth that extended into his bones. He felt memory stir. His first word, his mother's embrace, the feel of cool river stones beneath his feet. A quiet laughter welled in his chest, a sound so human he almost wept. Hermes watched, eyes gleaming. When Arian set the empty flask down, the other vessel dissolved in a swirl of silver mist, leaving no trace. "Well chosen," Hermes declared, and the air shimmered with approval. "You have gambled not on chance, but on faith. Faith in the fire you carry, and in the soul that guides it." The plateau seemed to sigh in relief. The eternal flame's glow softened to a steady sunrise hue, as though acknowledging a bond beyond power alone. Arian's heart still beat strongly. He had won without sacrifice of self. Yet before he could speak, Hermes raised a hand. "One final gift," he said. From within his cloak, he drew a slender wreath woven from olive leaves and silver thread. "Place this upon the hammer's haft. It will temper the flame's hunger, ensuring that each strike you deliver honors life rather than destroys it." Arian accepted the wreath and looped it carefully around the hammer's deal. As the silvery leaves touched the runic carvings, they glowed briefly before paling to a gentle sheen. The hammer vibrated in his grip, alive with promise and purpose. Hermes stepped back, wings flickering behind him like sparks. "Go now," he said. "You have earned your boon. May your craft bring light to the world, not darkness." With that, the messenger god vanished into a gust of wind scented with jasmine and storm. Arian stood alone, hammer in hand, watching as twilight deepened around him. The gamble of passage had tested his resolve, his intuition, and his heart, and he had emerged whole. In the hush of the highlands, he paused to consider the path ahead. Olympus's trials were not over, far from it, but he had proven that power need not cost the soul. Into the night, he began his journey home, knowing that every blow of his hammer would carry the weight of that choice, shaping not only metal, but the destiny of both mortal and divine. By the time Arian crested the final ridgeline, the first light of dawn had begun to pale the eastern sky. In his hand, the hammer, now bound with the olive and silver wreath, rested like a promise fulfilled, its runes no longer scorching with raw power, but glowing with a steady, tempered warmth. Before him lay the winding path back to Thalia's cottage, where the hearth awaited both mother and son. Yet though his journey home was familiar, Arian knew he would step into that simple world forever changed. As he descended toward the valley, he passed fields where harvesters bent under golden wheat. He paused to watch them, recalling Dorian's, warning that every gift carried its shadow, that flame could create as easily as destroy. With one soft strike of the hammer on a nearby stone, he brought forth a gentle spark that flared into life and danced above his palm. He let it drift toward the sheaves, and they shimmered, ripening in an instant to their fullest promise before settling back to their natural hue. A hush fell over the workers, who stared at him as though witnessing a miracle. Arian offered a small smile and continued on, mindful not to let even benevolence slip into arrogance. When he reached the cottage door, Thalia stood in its frame, cloak wrapped tight against the morning chill. Her eyes widened at the sight of the hammer, her heart racing between hope and dread. Behind her, the hearth's embers lay cold, a stark reminder of the trials her son had faced in darkness unseen. Without a word, Arian set the hammer gently on the threshold and knelt before her, head bowed. Thalia's hands trembled as she reached for him. "My son," she whispered, voice breaking with relief. "You've returned." She studied his face, searching for losses, faded memories, a hollow emptiness, but found only warmth in his gaze. "And what have you brought back from the underworld?" Arian rose, brushing soot from his tunic, and reached for the hammer. Its head glowed softly, as if greeting him home. "More than fire," he replied, voice calm yet resonant. "I've carried the eternal flame, tempered by compassion. But I have also given something in return." He placed the hammer before the hearth and lowered himself to one knee again. "I offered my name to open the gate, and the underworld took it in silence. There are things I no longer remember, moments of my earliest childhood, the sound of my own laughter in dreams. Yet I do not regret the trade, for without it, this flame would consume more than steel." Thalia knelt beside him, pressing her palm to his cheek. "Who you are remains, Arian. Name or no name, your heart, your choices, define you more than words ever could." She stood and guided him to the hearth. "Show me, then, what you have forged." Together, they approached the cold hearthstone. Arian lifted the hammer and struck the anvil once, a single, ringing note that pulsed through the cottage like a heartbeat. From the air above the anvil, a ribbon of white gold flame curved and formed itself into a small brazier suspended in mid-air. Its light was gentle, reminiscent of sunrise caught in dew, enough to cast warmth but not scorch the walls. Thalia reached out, fingers brushing the brazier's rim, and felt a soothing warmth that spoke of safety rather than danger. A smile touched her lips. "You have given life to fire," she murmured, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "You have honored the gift and the cost." Word of Arian's return and his miraculous hearth spread quickly through the valley. That evening, villagers gathered outside the cottage, lanterns in hand and offerings of grain and flowers at their feet. They spoke in hushed tones of how the fields had bowed to his touch, how the flame he bore could warm even the coldest hearts. Yet when they looked upon him, they saw not a god or a phantom, but a young man whose eyes carried both sorrow and serenity. Dorian arrived at their side, leaning on his hammer for support. He studied Arian with pride shining through the soot on his face. "You have done what I feared and hoped you might," he said softly. "You have forged power without losing your soul. You have bent flame without bending your will." He patted the enchanted hammer's haft. The world will remember this day. That night, as lanterns glowed and songs rose into the star-flecked sky, Arian slipped away from the crowd. He wandered down to the riverbank where he had often played as a child, its waters now calm under the moon's reflection. He knelt by the shore and reached into his satchel, retrieving the empty vial that once held Styx water. He gazed at it for a long moment, then cast it into the current. It spun once, twice, and sank, carried away by the river's gentle pull, an offering to the boundary he had crossed and the price he had paid. On his way back, he noticed a child huddled near the water's edge, eyes wide at the sight of the empty vial flicking downstream. Arian crouched beside her, offering a gentle smile. "Do not fear what passes from your life," he said softly, lifting the vial from the water's edge. "Sometimes, letting go makes room for greater gifts." He handed it back. The girl accepted it with reverence, then ran to join her family at the village square, where lights danced around a joyous bonfire. At the bonfire's center, Arion stood with Thalia and Dorian, listening to laughter and stories of his deeds. Yet his gaze drifted upward to the constellation of the forge, stars arranged like a hammer striking an anvil across the night sky. He felt a stirring in his chest, a flame that no trial could ever consume, the flame of purpose. He turned to Thalia, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "This journey was never mine alone," he said, voice gentle. "You and Dorian shaped me as much as any god or monster. I carry the fire, but you carry my heart." Thalia leaned into him, her voice a soft conclusion to a long chapter. "And together we will light the path ahead." As the bonfire crackled and embers soared like fleeting stars, Arion lifted the enchanted hammer and struck once more. Each spark that flew seemed to bless the world. Fields beyond the valley, hearts longing for hope, and the fragile balance between mortal ambition and divine mercy. In that moment, the Son of Fire stood, not just as a bearer of flame, but as its guardian, a living testament to sacrifice, to return, and to the understanding that the greatest power lies not in what you wield, but in what you choose to keep. The first time Leonthe swung her spear, the walls of Sparta trembled, not from a god's thunderbolt, but from the fierce grace of a woman born to battle. Dawn's pale light painted the training yard in strokes of silver and shadow as disciplined formations of hoplites marched across the sand. But at its heart stood Leonthe, shield at her side, auburn hair braided tight, eyes like burnished steel, fixed on the horizon. She was not the daughter of a noble house by coincidence. Her lineage traced back to bloodlines that had ruled these hills and valleys for generations. Yet she carried their legacy as both gift and burden. In the sprawling courtyard, instructors barked commands, correcting stances and shouting lessons in rhythm with clashing bronze. Leonthe moved among them with uncanny precision, each footfall measured, each pivot exact. When her hafted spear cut through the air, it sang a note of authority, bending the training swords of her peers under its arc. Young warriors gasped as she parried blows that would have felled seasoned fighters, her eyes never leaving her opponent's throat. She bore the crest of Sparta not as ornament, but as promise. From childhood she had been taught, a Spartan's birthright was discipline. A Spartan's destiny was excellence. Yet in those early years, Leonthe found little comfort in drills and orders. She watched her brothers celebrated for victories on distant plains, while she, gifted in blade and tactics, practiced in silence, her accomplishments seen but seldom praised. The ancient code allowed a woman's strength, but never her fame. Still, Leonthe's spirit burned brighter than any resentment. She saw war not as spectacle, but as solemn duty, the ultimate expression of courage and sacrifice. When the trumpet sounded the day's first charge, she raised her spear in salute to the rising sun, offering herself to the gods of war and hearth alike. The ritual was both prayer and promise, that she would stand unwavering in the face of chaos, that she would shield her people even at the cost of her own life. Her reputation grew through whispered tales as much as through battlefield feats. Soldiers who'd fought at Thermopylae and Marathon spoke of a lone shield maiden cutting through enemy lines, a phantom in crimson leather and bronze. They spoke of her joyless smile, of eyes that did not waver even as arrows rained around her. Some claimed she moved with supernatural grace. Others swore they saw faint, ghostly wings flicker in her wake. But all agreed on one truth. Leonthe was Sparta's indomitable heart, its living symbol of unbreakable will. One afternoon, as she practiced solo beneath a grove of silver-leaf trees, a messenger arrived bearing a sealed scroll. The seal bore the emblem of the Ephors, Sparta's ruling council. Her breath caught as she sliced the ribbon with her dagger and unrolled the parchment. A hush fell over the grove. Word had come of a distant threat, rumours of a warlord gathering mercenaries beyond the Aegean to challenge Sparta's dominance. The Ephors commanded Leonthe's presence at council. They sought her counsel, or perhaps they sought to test her loyalty. Clad in ceremonial greaves and her family's crest, a laurel wreath entwined with spears, Leonthe entered the marble hall where elder statesmen sat on stone thrones. Their eyes, lined with age and caution, stud-eyed her as she approached. Silence reigned until the council's chairman, an austere figure named Callistratos, spoke. "You stand before us, daughter of Sparta, a warrior unmatched. Will you lead our scouts to this emerging threat? Will you harness your blade and your mind to defend our city-state?" Leonthe met his gaze without hesitation. "I will go," she replied, voice steadier than her racing heart. "I will see this warlord's strength, learn his strategy, and return with the shield of Sparta unbroken." Her words carried the weight of promise, and the council nodded in solemn accord. That night, Leonthe stood on the ramparts, the moon's cool glow reflecting off her spear's tip. Below her, the city slept, its people trusting that Sparta's shield stood ever ready to defend them. She closed her eyes, drawing in the scent of olive groves and the distant crash of waves. In her breastplate, she carried not only bronze and leather, but the hopes of every Spartan, from the lowliest farmer to the highest ephor. Still, beneath her unwavering resolve, a quieter longing stirred, for a purpose beyond war's endless cycle, for a connection that spoke to something deeper than blood and duty. Little did she know that such a connection awaited her, cloaked in feathers and song, and that her greatest challenge would not be a foreign warlord, but the battleground of her own heart. At the edge of a serene lake, nestled within whispering reeds and silvery moonlight, Leonthe paused to catch her breath. The scout's mission had led her here, to this hidden inlet, far beyond Sparta's stone walls. Cradled by ancient cypresses, the water mirrored a sky strewn with stars, and a cool breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She knelt on a smooth rock, lowering her spear's tip to the water's surface to test its depth. In that still moment, a soft melody drifted across the ripples, an otherworldly song woven of longing and grace that tugged at her heart. Leonthe rose, every muscle taut with curiosity and caution. No mortal bird could sing such lament. She followed the sound around the lake's curve and gasped at what she saw. A swan of impossible beauty, its pure white feathers tipped in silver light, gliding toward her as if invited. The creature's long neck arched with regal poise, and its eyes, strangely human in their depth, held a sadness so profound it stirred emotions Leonthe had never known in battle. She tightened her grip on her spear, though she sensed no threat. The swan hovered just beyond the reeds, head tilted in silent inquiry. Leonthe studied it. Its wings were broader than any swan she had seen, the membrane between feathers shimmering like mother of pearl. When it opened its beak, the song resumed, a wordless hymn that echoed the world's earliest morning, full of promise and wistful remembrance. A single tear slipped down Leonthe's cheek. She remembered her training. Remain impassive, unwavering in the face of distraction. Yet something in the swan's melody loosened that iron discipline, replacing it with a tenderness she could neither name nor deny. She reached into her pouch, removing a small piece of dried barley, scavenged earlier for her weary scouts, and held it out. The swan tilted its head, as though intrigued, then stepped onto the shore, each movement slow and deliberate. When the bird drew near, Leonthe dropped the barley at its feet. The swan bent and pecked gently, then looked up, meeting Leonthe's gaze with those luminous eyes. A shiver ran through her. She felt laid bare, as if the swan could read the silent ache beneath her warrior exterior. In that instant, she wondered if fate had guided her here not for war, but for something deeper. A bridge between her ironclad duty and a heart rarely allowed to soften. The night grew still, except for that haunting song. Leonthe knelt beside the swan, her hand hovering just inches above its feathers. Though she ached to touch it, she held back, honoring a silent boundary between the mortal and the magnificent. "Who are you?" she whispered, voice as soft as the starlight that danced across the water. The swan answered only with another note, a harmony that resonated in Leonthi's bones, stirring memories she could not place. Distant laughter, warm embraces, the echo of a voice calling her name in a dream. She let her guard down completely, closing her eyes and allowing the music to wash over her. The spear and shield at her side felt incongruous in this moment, symbols of strength that now weighed heavy with unspoken longing. When she opened her eyes again, the swan had shifted closer, its downy breast brushing against her boots. Leonthi exhaled, heart pounding as though on the brink of some ancient covenant. Suddenly ripples spread across the lake's surface, and a shaft of moonlight illuminated a second figure emerging from the reeds. Taller and more human in form, he stepped forward with fluid grace. Moonlight glinted from his hair like spun silver, and his eyes held Leonthi's with an intensity that made her breath catch. His skin was pale, almost luminous. His garments flowed like water itself, pale blue fading into white at the hems. In his hand, he held a single swan feather, its quills stained with droplets of moonlight. Leonthi instinctively reached for her spear, but the swan, its song now a soft murmur, stepped between them. The man inclined his head, lips curving into a gentle smile. "Fear not, warrior," he said, voice a melody that matched the swan's refrain. "I am Apollo, cast here by my father's fury." He lifted the feather and let it drift to the ground. "Zeus, in his wrath, transformed me until I understood the limitations of pride. I came to these waters seeking solace, but found only heartbreak. Until you." Leonthi's pulse thundered in her ears. Apollo, god of light, music, prophecy, stood before her, vulnerable in swan's guise. She swallowed hard. She began, but words failed her. Not since the forging of her first spear had she felt such awe mixed with fear. Apollo knelt, eyes glistening with emotion. "I have watched your journeys, Leonthi of Sparta. Your strength is legendary, but so too is your solitude. In human form, I could never approach. But as this swan, I dared hope you might see beyond the armor to the heart beneath." Leonthi lowered spear and shield at her feet. "I see," she replied at last, voice steady though her heart trembled. "I have seen more tonight than years of battle taught me." He smiled, rising to his full height. "Stay by the water's edge, and I will share what the gods will not, to reveal the harmony between duty and desire." He gestured to the lake. "Sit with me." They settled on the smooth grass, side by side. Above them, stars wheeled through the sky, bearing silent witness. Apollo raised his hand, and the swan's song rose again, weaving into his words. He spoke of Olympus's judgment, of how pride had blinded him to love's true power, and how the swan's form had taught him humility. Leonthi listened, her warrior's heart softening with each confession. She shared her own story, the loneliness of command, the burden of legacy, the questions that haunted her in the silent hours. By the time dawn's first flush tinted the horizon, they had forged a bond neither mortal nor god had anticipated. Apollo reached into the water, tracing his fingers through its surface. Ripples shaped themselves into a vision. Leonthi leading a battalion into dawn's light, her gaze fierce yet fearless, an ethereal swan at her side, his wings outstretched to shelter her. Leonthi watched, breath caught between awe and longing. "Is this destiny?" she whispered. Apollo turned to her, eyes soft. "It is choice. I choose to stand by you, to temper your warrior fire with the grace of song. Will you let me?" She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of steel give way to something warmer. When she opened them, she nodded. "I choose you, as I choose my path." At that moment, the swan took flight from the water, circling above them in a flight of pure white light before ascending toward the sun's promise. As it vanished into the morning sky, the first birdsong rose in tribute. Leonthi and Apollo remained by the lake's edge, their hands finding each other in a gesture that bound fate with choice. Far beyond, the fortress gates of Sparta stood silent. Yet in the hearts of two unlikely souls, a new alliance had been forged, one of warriors' steel and divine melody, promising a story that would echo through legend long after shields and spears lay silent under dust and stars. Dawn broke over Sparta's gleaming ramparts, but Leonthe's world was far from the bustle of the city. She stood at the edge of the council chamber, draped in the ducal blue of her house, her breastplate gleaming like moonlight on water. The ephors had summoned her to confirm marching orders against the rising warlord beyond the Aegean, yet her mind drifted back to the lake's gentle music and the swan's mournful hymn. In her breast she carried not only a spear, but a heart caught between duty and something far more fragile, a silent devotion to a god disguised as a bird. Messages were delivered, strategies debated, and Leonthe's voice rang clear in every command. Yet beneath her armor, her pulse throbbed with unspoken longing. Each time she lifted her hand to point out a tactical advance, she felt the memory of Apollo's measuring gaze, his silver lament echoing in her blood. To her fellow officers, she was Sparta's fiercest shield maiden. To herself, she was a woman, torn by a love that dared not speak its name. That evening, under a waning moon, she slipped away from the encampment. Soldiers stood watch at every gate, but she knew every hidden track and sentinel blind spot around the city. With her spear slung across her back and a small satchel of provisions at her side, she followed the night wind, its faint hint of jasmine, of ozone, of divinity, down the winding trail toward the secret inlet where they had first met. The path was familiar. Olives bowed like silent sentinels and cypresses whispered overhead. Shadows danced as her torchlight flickered on weathered stones, each step echoing with memories. She recalled Apollo's voice, soft and sonorous. Silent devotion can be the truest form of worship. She had understood then that words might shatter the delicate bond they shared. Only actions could honor it. At the lake's edge, reeds rustled in greeting. The water lay still, a silver mirror reflecting the tremulous stars overhead. Leonthe knelt on the pebbled shore and reached into her satchel. She drew out a small lyre, crafted from olive wood and strings of spun gold, a gift from Apollo when they had first shared their secrets. Carefully, she placed it before her and began to play, soft, measured notes that wove into the night air like threads of moonlight. Her melody was neither triumph nor lament, but a whispered offering, each chord a vow of faith, each pause a tribute to the intimacy they had forged. The wood beneath her fingertips felt warm, alive with the echo of his presence. She closed her eyes, letting memory guide her hands, recalling the way his fingers had once brushed the same strings, teaching her the harmony of mortals and gods. A ripple disturbed the lake's surface, and Leonthe's heart surged. From the black water emerged not a swan this time, but the pale figure of Apollo in human form, clothed in robes the color of dawn. He moved without a sound, as though guided by the music itself, and knelt beside her. The strings sang once more, under her touch, and he listened, eyes unfathomable pools reflecting both pride and affection. When the final note faded, Leonthe lowered the lyre and lifted her gaze to him. She felt her own breath catch in her throat, the night air charged with something sacred. He reached out, his hand hovering an inch above the wood. "You honor me," he said softly, voice entwined with the soft rustle of reeds. "Your devotion speaks more eloquently than any vow uttered." She rose, heart pounding. "I could not stay away," she admitted, voice low but steady. Each moment apart felt like the world had gone silent. Her eyes glistened as she continued. "I serve Sparta with my spear, yet I serve you with my soul. I swear my loyalty in deeds, not words." Apollo brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Leonthe," he murmured, "in your silent devotion, I find a sanctuary. You offer me trust without demand, love without expectations. The gods take much, yet you give freely." He reached into his tunic and produced a single white feather, softer than silk. "Take this," he whispered, pressing it into her palm. "It is a symbol of our bond, of faith tested in silence and strengthened by understanding." Leonthe cradled the feather as though it were the most precious treasure, tears glinting in her eyes. She bowed her head, pressing it to her lips. "I will carry it always," she vowed, her voice trembling with emotion. Above them, the moon slid behind a cloud, and the lake dimmed to shadow. Yet in that darkness, their connection burned brighter than any torch. Apollo rose, extending his hand. "Come with me," he invited. "There is more to see." He led her down a hidden path, beside the water, where boulders formed a natural amphitheatre, and ferns whispered legends of old. There, in the hush, he spoke of his own sacrifices, the cost of divine wrath, the loneliness of immortality, and the solace he found in her steadfast heart. Leonthe listened, her warrior pride yielding to empathy as she recognized the vulnerability of a god in exile from his own realm. They spoke until the night waned toward dawn, weaving promises in silence and revelations in shared glances. As the eastern sky softened to pale gold, they returned to the shore. Apollo knelt once more, gathering a handful of lake mist in his palm. He let it glitter through his fingers, scattering droplets like tiny stars across the water's surface. "This is our secret," he said, voice gentle, "a devotion that needs no words, a love that speaks in gestures. Carry it within you, Leonthe of Sparta, and know that divine and mortal are bound by more than fate. They are bound by choice." He kissed her hand, then turned to fade back, into the morning mist, leaving her alone at the water's edge, armed with a single feather and the beating of her own steadfast heart. Leonthe watched the fog swirl where he had stood, the feather's soft glow pressed to her chest. In that quiet dawn, she felt whole, both warrior and lover, bound by silent devotion stronger than any steel. And as she journeyed back to Sparta's, weighting spear and shield, she carried within her the purest song of all, one sung in the unspoken heartbeat between souls. Thunder rolled across the heavens like a celestial drumbeat, rippling through the marble halls of Olympus and shaking the very foundations of mortal hearts. Far below, in the valley of Sparta, storm clouds boiled across the sky, casting jagged shadows against the rugged peaks. It was as though the world itself trembled in anticipation of divine fury. Leonthe stood at the prow of her scout ship, waves churning white at her feet as she crossed the Gulf of Corinth to deliver vital intelligence to her homeland. The feather Apollo had given her lay tucked inside her breastplate, a talisman of hope against the gathering darkness. Each lurch of the vessel reminded her of the god's promise, and she closed her eyes, offering silent gratitude for the quiet bond they shared. Yet Olympus brooded. Zeus, enthroned on his cloud-carved dais, watched with eyes like storm clouds, his braided beard whipping in the wind of his wrath. He had sensed Apollo's heart turning toward a mortal, to the shield maiden whose silent devotion had dared to bridge the chasm between god and human. A breach of cosmic order could not stand. With a thunderous gesture, Zeus summoned his eagle, a towering beast of gold and onyx, commanding it to retrieve Apollo and bring him before the throne. The eagle's wings cleaved the sky like a living tempest, harboring heavenly decree beneath each beat. Meanwhile, Leonthe's ship sliced through darkening waters. Sailors tightened ropes and battened down hatches as sheets of rain began to fall. She gripped the oaken rail, mind drifting to the last night at the lake's edge. Apollo's gentle assurance, the feather's soft glow, the vow whispered between hearts. Did the gods see compassion as a crime? Suddenly, a bolt of lightning cleaved the sky, striking the mast in a shower of splinters. The ship groaned as sails ripped and rigging snapped. Leonthe shouted orders, rallying her crew to secure what they could, but the tempest answered her command with greater fury. Waves rose like stone walls, swirling currents threatening to swallow them whole. Amid the chaos, a deafening roar echoed above the thunder, an eagle's cry twisted by rage. Leonthe looked skyward to see the divine bird descending, clutching a figure in its talons. Apollo, bound by golden chains that glowed with celestial light, struggled in mid-air, his moonlit robes torn by wind and rain. Down, Leonthe screamed, but the eagle barely faltered as it dove toward the deck, talons ready to rend at disobedience. With no time to draw her spear, Leonthe sprinted forward and thrust her shield between herself and the falling form. The impact sent her sliding across the wet planks as Apollo tumbled onto her shield in a burst of wind and rain. The eagle landed beside them, eyes blazing like molten gold. From its beak issued a voice both thunderous and final. By Zeus's command, you have harbored Olympus's exile, mortal. The bonds between God and man have been broken. Your bond with Apollo is an affront to celestial law. The eagle's wings unfolded, and with a single motion it raised a gauntleted talon toward Leonthe. She braced herself, shield raised, heart hammering. "Let him go!" she cried. "He is no monster. He is my equal in devotion." The eagle's gaze softened for a heartbeat at her words, but the chains around Apollo tightened, drawing him to his knees. Your defiance plunges both of you into Zeus's judgment. Mortal, prepare to face the wrath you embrace. A white-hot bolt of lightning crackled from the sky, arcing toward Leonthe's heart. Instinctively, she lifted the feather before her like a banner. To her astonishment, the plume blazed with gentle light, dispersing the bolt into harmless sparks. The eagle recoiled, talons clenching the deck as though scorched. Apollo's voice rang out, clear as a mountain stream. "Leonthe, trust in what we share." He raised his bound hands and whispered a single word in the ancient tongue. The chains evaporated in a spray of starlight, and in their place a wave of golden feathers drifted from his palms, wafting toward the eagle. The celestial bird faltered, feathers ruffled by the unexpected mercy. It lowered its head in submission, wings folding. Zeus's eagle, emblem of divine justice, bowed before a mortal's love and a god's compassion. The moment held like a breath caught between storm and calm. A voice thundered across the chasm between earth and Olympus. "Apollo, son of my own blood, you have defied the edict I laid before you. Mortal, you have thwarted my wrath with gifts I did not grant you. Both of you stand convicted." Lightning lanced around the ship, and a pillar of stormlight formed before them, crackling with imminent verdict. Leonthe stood with spear in hand, resolute as the shore itself. "Then pronounce your verdict," she challenged. "But know this, I would face all Olympus to protect what is just." For 2 heartbeats, silence reigned. Then Zeus's voice, distant as thunder's echo, spoke. Words that split the sky. "Let it be known across all realms that love born of choice is as sacred as blood. Yet boundaries must stand to preserve the balance. Mortal, you shall bear the burden of divine favor and divine wrath. You are blessed, and you are marked." The storm shifted, funneling into a spiraling column above Leonthe's head. Rain fell in a curtain of diamonds, and the winds stilled as though listening. Within that stillness, Leonthe felt a searing warmth upon her breast, a brand of faint silver light blossoming where the feather had rested. She reached down, touching its shimmer through her armor. It pulsed with living power, the dual mark of Olympus, protection and trial fused in a single sigil. Zeus's eagle spread its mighty wings, and with a final echoing cry ascended into the storm clouds, carrying Apollo on its back. The chains of light had reformed around his wrists, glowing with promise of both freedom and reckoning. Apollo reached down, his fingers brushing Leonthe's cheek in a fleeting caress. His eyes held a fierce solemnity, sorrow for leaving, gratitude for her sacrifice, and a vow unspoken but understood. Then the eagle soared upward, and the storm followed it, breaking apart in a cascade of rainbows and light. The waves calmed. Sails flapped gently in a forgiving breeze. The ship righted itself, and sailors scrambled to regain control under Leonthi's unwavering command. As dawn broke in a wash of gold, Leonthi stood alone at the helm, the sigil's glow warming her heart. The gods had judged, and in their judgment, they had both blessed and cursed her. She closed her eyes, finger tracing the emblem's edges beneath her breastplate, and whispered a vow to the silent sky. I carry your mark, Zeus, and I bear the price. I will prove that mortal and god can walk between worlds in honor. My heart's devotion endures beyond thunder and decree. Far above, Olympus watched in rapt silence. And in that moment, the fate of love and legend was sealed, etched in lightning, bound by choice and destined to echo across all realms. Night had long since fallen over Sparta when Leonthi slipped through the silent gates, the humid breath of summer wrapping around her like a cloak. The city's torches flickered before shuttered homes, and the distant clang of the night watches. Armor was the only sound to break the hush. At her breast dazzled the faint silver sigil bestowed by Zeus, a mark of favor and of burden, pulsing softly against her cuirass. Each heartbeat reminded her of the choice she had made, the oath she had kept, and the god she now served in her soul. She made her way through winding alleys to the temple courtyard, where a marble statue had been erected in Apollo's honor. A graceful figure draped in flowing robes, lyre in hand, gaze cast toward the heavens. The artisans had captured his otherworldly beauty, soft features, serene countenance, but no mortal craft could replicate the life she saw in his eyes that night at the lake. Under moonlight, the statue's stone seemed to breathe, as though waiting for a gentle breeze or the whisper of a song. Leonthi touched its base, speaking words she did not voice in daylight. I promised an eternal vigil, she murmured, her voice carrying in the cool air. I vowed that even when Olympus's storms rage, I would stand watch where your memory dwells. She settled onto the marble steps, spear set against the plinth like a guardian's staff, and drew the silver feather from inside her cloak. Its soft light shimmered against her palm, illuminating the sigil at her breast. The scent of olive oil and incense drifted from the temple doors, where acolytes tended the sacred flame of Hestia. Leonthi poured out a libation of wine and rose, petals before the statue, an offering both of gratitude and of remembrance. As the crimson liquid pooled at Apollo's feet, she closed her eyes and allowed memories to surface. The swan's first song, the hush of reeds at midnight, the warmth of his hand on her cheek. Each recollection filled her with both solace and a longing that no mortal vigil could ever fully satisfy. Hours passed in quiet contemplation. A single moth, drawn by the feather's glow, fluttered against the statue's lyre, as though curious for the music it represented. Leonthi watched it, her thoughts drifting to the battlefield, where she had once known only steel and strategy. Now, her armor bore not just emblems of war, but symbols of love's resilience in the face of divine decree. She rose to her feet and circled the statue, trailing her fingers along Apollo's sculpted robes. They say the gods move on, that mortals will forget, she whispered. But I will not. You walked alongside me in feathers and in form. Now your spirit walks within me. Her eyes lifted to the moon, a silent vow offered to the night sky. A distant tremor rattled the courtyard. Stones, the approach of a traveller. Leonthi drew her cloak tighter and stood sentinel, spear at the ready. From the shadows emerged an old priestess, stooped and hooded, bearing a lantern whose flame danced like a captive star. Her eyes, lined with age and knowing, rested on the statue and then on Leonthi. Child of Sparta, the priestess said softly, voice like dry leaves. Your vigil honors the divine, but the world beyond these walls stirs with unease. The ephors grow restless without news of your scouts, and rumors of Olympus's judgment weigh heavily on the people's hearts. She set the lantern beside the libation. The gods have spoken through thunder and decree. Now they await mortal resolve. Leonthe nodded, eyes unflinching. I have given all I can. My oath remains, unwavering as mountain stone. But I will not abandon my people either. I stand watch for the god I love, even as I serve the polis that shaped me. The priestess studied her, lips curved in both compassion and concern. Balance is the forge of destiny, she murmured. As you temper steel with flame, so must you temper love with duty. The night grows thin, soon the sun will ascend. With that, she retreated into shadow, leaving the courtyard in solemn stillness. Leonthe sank back to the steps, spear resting across her lap, and stared at the statue's face. Dawn's first breath seeped into the sky, staining the horizon with rose and gold. She pressed the feather against the cold marble, whispering a prayer. May your music echo in every dawn, your light guide every step, and your memory live in every heart. With the sky's illumination, the sigil at her breast flared once, bright enough to chase away the lingering darkness. Leonthe rose and placed the feather in a small niche carved behind the statue's pedestal, where it would glow for all who came to pay homage. As torchbearers kindled the temple lamps and the first chorus of dawn bells rang out, Leonthe descended. The steps. She adjusted her armor, the weight of steel tempered now by the gentler burden of her oath. The ephors would summon her at first light. Duties awaited beyond this sacred vigil. Yet in her heart, she carried both vow and memory, shield and song entwined. Before she passed through the gates, Leonthe cast one final glance back at Apollo's marble form. The scent of rose petals lingered in the air, and the morning sun crowned the statue's head in a halo of light. She whispered, barely louder than the breeze, "My eternal vigil continues, even when I must walk in daylight." With that, she turned toward Sparta's waking streets, her heart steadfast, her purpose renewed, and her soul forever bound to the silent melody of a god's devotion. The air was thick with night's hush, broken only by the gentle susurrus of wind weaving through the willow's silken leaves. Beneath its drooping canopy, Melanion knelt on dew-kissed grass, his fingers tracing the concentric rings of an ancient lyre carved with symbols that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Each string, he believed, held a fragment of the world's unspoken song, a melody that echoed through all things, from the rustle of feathers to the sigh of the stars. He had come to this secluded glade in search of inspiration, guided by dreams that whispered his name like a half-remembered chorus. In those dreams, he heard 9 voices entwining in perfect harmony, voices that beckoned him toward a destiny beyond mortal comprehension. Yet waking, he found only silence, and the weight of expectation pressing on his heart as heavily as stone. Tonight, the willow's branches danced above him, their slender tendrils brushing his shoulders like an unseen audience. Melanion closed his eyes and inhaled, drawing in the scent of ripening blackberries and damp earth. He let his breath settle into the tempo of the tree's sway, each exhale loosening the knots in his mind. In that fragile stillness, a single thought emerged. Every song must begin with a breath, a whisper born from quiet longing. He lifted the lyre, its wood warm against his palm. With one finger, he plucked the lowest string, and the note rang clear, a single voice against the vast hush. It trembled in the air, as delicate as dawn's first light. Encouraged, he added a second string, weaving 2 tones into a simple interval that shimmered like moonlight on water. Yet even as the melody grew, a dissonant doubt lingered. Would any mortal ears understand the song he carried within? Soft footsteps approached through the undergrowth, unheard until they stood behind him like a shadow. Melanion paused, lyre in hand, and turned to see a figure robed in silver and violet, the muse Calliope, guardian of epic song, her gaze gentle but discerning. Her presence lent the glade the hush of suspended time. "Your melody stirs the air," she said, voice like parchment rustling in a candlelit chamber. "Yet it lacks the spark that binds soul to sky." "What do you seek, Millennian of the Muses?" He bowed his head respectfully. "I seek the song that will outlast stone, that will echo when mortal tongues have turned to dust. But I fear I know only fragments, whispers of what once was, not the fullness of what could be." His fingers brushed the strings, producing a hesitant trill before the chord faded into the night. Calliope stepped closer, moonlight pooling around her feet. "Then listen," she whispered, extending a hand toward the willow. "Not only with ears, but with your heart. The world speaks in layers. The rustle of leaves is but one verse. Beneath it lie the murmurs of earth, of life, and of loss. Open yourself to all voices." Melandian closed his eyes and reached out, not for sound, but for feeling. He felt the willow's sap pulsing, sensed the earth's slow exhalations, and heard the tiny thrum of nocturnal insects hidden in the grass. When he opened his ears again, he perceived a tapestry of subtle rhythms, a cricket's metronome, the slow drip of dew, the willow's sigh. Gathering these threads, he let his hand drift across the lyre's strings, coaxing them to respond in kind. The first phrase emerged as a breath of wind, light, uncertain, yet tinged with promise. Then a lower counterpoint joined, an undercurrent of longing, like a forgotten lullaby murmured to sleepers. As Melandian wove these voices together, the glade itself seemed to lean in, its shadows brightening with each note. The melody threaded through the willow's branches, down into the grass, and echoed back from unseen tree trunks. Calliope smiled, her form glowing faintly. "You feel them now, each layer of the world's song. But remember, a true masterpiece binds emotion and action. Thought alone will fade. You must shape your melody with intent." Melandian nodded, pulse racing as insight bloomed in his chest. He understood at last that the song he sought was not merely an echo of nature's chorus, but a reflection of his own heart's journey. Drawing a deep breath, he struck a chord that resonated with both tenderness and resolve, then shifted to a brighter counter-melody, one that danced with flickering hope. His fingers moved with growing confidence, weaving intricate harmonies that entwined sorrow and joy, loss and renewal. With each measure, Melandian felt something within him shift. Memories surfaced. His mother's laughter by the hearth, the first time he pressed lips to strings and felt the lyre hum beneath his touch. The tender moments shared under moonlit skies with spirits both mortal and divine. These recollections fanned the spark in his soul, infusing the melody with authenticity. The music grew richer, its notes curling like smoke toward the canopy above. At the glade's edge, other muses emerged, Erato with coral wreaths in her hair, her eyes alight with curiosity, Thalia, laughter dancing on her lips as she tapped her foot, and Euterpe, whose flute breathed alongside the lyre's song. They formed a silent chorus, their presence lending the melody wings. Melandian closed his eyes, allowing their inspiration to guide him. He introduced a hopeful motif, a gentle rise and fall that echoed the breath of life itself, then resolved it with a grounded, peaceful cadence. The final note lingered in the hush, as though the very night held its breath in reverence. When silence returned, Melandian sank to one knee, lyre resting in his lap. Calliope stepped forward and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You have heard the world's many voices and given them shape. Your whispers by the willow will endure, because it was born of feeling, of memory, and of intent." She placed a small silver key in his palm. "This opens the Hall of Muses, where your song will join those of heroes and gods. But remember, this is only the first breath of your journey. Greater compositions await. Catch their whispers before they slip away." Melandian looked at the key, its surface engraved with a single rune that glowed softly in the moonlight. Gratitude and awe filled his chest so deeply that tears pricked the corners of his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion. I will honor this gift with every note to come. Calliope vanished as the first blush of dawn tinted the willow's leaves silver and rose. The other muses retreated silently, leaving Milanion alone in the glade. He rose, lyre strapped to his back, and took one last look at the ancient tree whose branches had borne witness to his transformation. The breeze stirred, as though offering a final benediction. I will not forget, he vowed aloud. This melody is but the first step. With the Hall of Muses key tucked safely at his waist, Milanion turned toward the winding path that led back to the world of men. Each footfall carried the echo of newfound purpose, to forge the next chords of his destiny, to honor the whispers by the willow, and to heed every voice that stirred his soul. The marble hall lay silent beneath vaulted ceilings etched with constellations, an echoing testament to the god's patronage of song. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the polished floor. Milanion stood before the 9 ivory thrones of the Muses, heart pounding like a war drum. Each seat bore the symbol of a sister: Calliope's laurel wreath, Clio's scroll, Euterpe's flute, Thalia's comic mask, Melpomene's tragic visage, Terpsichore's dancing feet, Erato's lyre, Polyhymnia's veil, and Urania's celestial globe. He dressed in simple robes of midnight blue, trimmed with silver thread that hinted at his mortal origins. Yet he felt their weight as a mantle of destiny. Today, he would be formally chosen, inducted into the eternal chorus that shaped legends and guided heroes. Every breath felt sacred, every footstep a prelude to transformation. At the hall's rear, a translucent curtain of mist swirled, shaped by unseen hands into shifting forms. Serpents of smoke, birds of vapor, and half-heard whispers of past masterpieces. Through that veil, the Muses would emerge to grant their final gifts. Milanion stepped forward, lyre in hand, and knelt before the lowest throne, Calliope's. He placed the silver key she had given him into a carved indentation on the armrest. Instantly, the mist coalesced into her form, ethereal, tall, with hair like woven starlight. Her eyes shone with approval as she rose and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Poet of beginnings," she intoned, voice resonant, "you have heard the world's hidden harmonies and given them shape. Rise as our chosen. Let your heart's song join the chorus of the divine." Milanion stood, breath caught, as she stepped aside. One by one, the other 8 Muses emerged. Clio traced the arc of history in the air with graceful fingers. Euterpe's flute tune hovered like a gentle breeze. Thalia's laughter brightened the hall. Melpomene's eyes glistened with cathartic sorrow. Terpsichore's body swayed in silent dance. Erato's fingers brushed her harp. Polyhymnia bowed, with contemplative grace. Urania's gaze turned skyward, as though charting his path among the stars. One by one, they each laid a gift upon his head and shoulders. Clio's feather quill inked with knowledge of the past, Euterpe's silver whistle singing melodies yet unheard, Thalia's garland of wildflowers for joy, Melpomene's black rose petal for depth, Terpsichore's anklet of spun gold for movement, Erato's rose-scented ribbon for love, Polyhymnia's scroll of silent prayer, and Urania's star-glass lens to see beyond the visible. As each gift settled, Milanion felt a warmth flood his veins, memories deepening, senses sharpening, inspiration blooming. The hall itself resonated. Walls hummed, floor trembled, and the constellations overhead flickered in affirmation. At last, all had bestowed their blessings. Calliope stepped forward once more, raising a crystalline chalice filled with ambrosial dew. "Drink, child of music," she beckoned. "By this draught, you bind your life to song. Your voice will echo in mortal halls and immortal realms alike. Yet remember, the greater the gift, the greater the responsibility. Use your art to uplift, to provoke thought, and to heal even the deepest wounds." Milanion accepted the chalice with reverent hands and raised it to his lips. The liquid slid down like liquid moonlight, filling him with such clarity that every string of his lyre vibrated in unison. He saw visions of future compositions, hymns sung by armies marching to justice, laments whispered by lovers under twilight, chorales echoing in temples of marble, and melodies woven into the very fabric of nature. When he lowered the chalice, the muses formed a circle around him, voices rising in a polyphonic choir, their harmonies intertwined with the hall's architecture, casting patterns of light and shadow that danced across his skin. The final chord swelled, then faded into a profound silence, one alive with potential. Calliope placed the chalice upon the lyre, now etched with the sigils of all 9 muses. "Go forth, Millennian," she proclaimed. "Carry our essence in your music. Let your compositions reflect the spectrum of human experience, from triumph to tragedy, from laughter to lament. And know that whenever you falter, you need only close your eyes and recall the whispers by the willow to realign your heart with our chorus." As the mist reclaimed the hall, weaving itself into the stained glass windows and carved ceilings, the ivory thrones stood empty once more, but their power lingered. Millennian knelt one final time, touching the polished floor, and offered a silent vow to honor every gift, every lesson, and every muse. When he rose, the hall's doors swung open of their own accord, revealing a world awaiting his song. In his grip, the lyre gleamed with newfound purpose. On his brow, the garland of wildflowers and silver ribbon gleamed like twin stars. His robes fluttered as if stirred by an unseen breeze, urging him forward. And so, chosen by the muses, Millennian stepped into the bright corridors of the palace, each footfall a note in the symphony of his destiny, the next verse in a song that would echo across ages. The grand hall of the Hall of Muses lay hushed in anticipation, its marble pillars gleaming like ivory sentinels and stained glass windows filtering dawn's first light into kaleidoscopic beams. Millennian stood at a raised dais, facing an audience of crowned kings, humble villagers, wandering bards, and most importantly, the 9 muses whose presence shimmered at the room's edges. Before him rested a blank parchment scroll and his lyre, now adorned with the sigils of inspiration bestowed by the divine sisters. Today, he would weave his magnum opus, the final composition, a piece destined to bind mortal experience and immortal insight in a single transcendent melody. He drew a steady breath, recalling Calliope's words. Great art must be shaped by intent. With deliberate grace, he unrolled the parchment and dipped a quill into ink carried from Clio's feather, its hue a deep indigo that seemed to absorb light. The hall held its breath as he inscribed the first notes, each symbol flowing from his hand like a whispered promise. The composition began with a simple motif, 4 descending notes that echoed the rustle of willow leaves on the night he first heard the world's hidden chorus. These notes represented beginnings, the spark of life, and the subtle heartbeat beneath all creation. As he transcribed them, a hush fell so deep that even the creak of wooden benches softened to silence. The lyre's strings vibrated, and unseen arms seemed to trace the air, guiding his quill. From the gentle prelude, the melody swelled into a fierce cadence, hammering drums that echoed heroism and hardship. Melpomene's petal-shaded rune pulsed as he wrote, infusing the strain with cathartic sorrow. The notes contorted, rising and falling like waves against cliffed shores, each chord a testament to every warrior's struggle, every peasant's toil, and every heart's silent battle. As the audience watched, the hall's torches flickered, in time with the tempo, casting dancing shadows that resembled dancing phantoms of ancestral ghosts. The furious strain collapsed into a mournful adagio, carried by Euterpe's silver whistle's echo. Millennian's hand trembled as he penned the lament, each note a droplet of memory, lost love, shattered dreams, regret's gentle ache. The stained glass dimmed as if drawn into the melancholy, and a single tear traced down Millennian's cheek, glinting in the prism of coloured light. Yet in that sorrow, there was solace. A reminder that beauty often arises from shadow. A trill of playful notes sprang forth as he shifted to a lively allegretto. Thalia's wildflower garland brightened the parchment's edges, and Terpsichore's golden anklet chimed in silent support. The melody danced with laughter. The clink of cup to cup in festive halls, the patter of children's feet on sunlit streets, the thrill of first love's awakening. The hall's tension lightened. Nobles smiled, children giggled, and even the muses seemed to sway in communion with his vibrant tones. Drawing upon Polyhymnia's scroll of silent prayer and Urania's star-glass vision, Melanion wove a grand finale that bound every theme together. He layered the opening prelude's motif beneath the interlude's joy, then allowed the strain of strife to harmonize with the lament's depth. Over this intricate tapestry, he wrote a soaring melody, 9 notes that climbed toward the vaulted, ceiling as if reaching for the stars. Each note carried the weight of human history, divine aspiration, and the timeless interplay between shadow and light. As he inscribed the final bar, the lyre in his hand hummed with reverence. The parchment glowed softly, the ink shimmering as though alive. The assembled crowd rose, breathless as the muses glided forward. Calliope placed a hand over the score and nodded, her eyes reflecting primordial pride. Clio rested her scroll upon his work, blessing it with the weight of time and legacy. One by one, each muse affirmed the masterpiece, their collective harmony resonating through the hall in a silent chord that echoed in every heart. Melandion lowered his quill, heart pounding. A hush presided for a heartbeat. Then, with a breath, shared between mortal and divine, he strummed the lyre. The hall of muses filled with melody, each movement unfolding in crystalline clarity. The prelude of origins whispered through the columns. The crescendo of strife shook the foundations. The lament and reflection wept in gentle echo. The interlude of joy danced upon the air, and the final composition soared like a phoenix aflame. Tears streamed down faces, peasant and king alike, as the music carried them beyond the confines of the marble hall into realms of shared humanity and sacred wonder. In that moment, the boundaries between earth and Olympus blurred. Mortals rose to the heights of divine inspiration, and the gods leaned closer to the pulse of human hearts. When the final chord dissolved into silence, the hall remained still, a sacred space suspended in awe. Melanion knelt, laying the lyre before the muses, offering his soul in gratitude. They encircled him, their blessings unspoken yet profound, and heaven itself seemed to hold its breath. Calliope broke the silence. Melandion, you have given voice to the tapestry of existence. Your final composition will echo through ages, a guiding beacon for all who seek the unity of mortal trial and divine purpose. Rise, composer of destiny. As he stood, the palace doors swung open to a new world, a world forever changed by a song woven from whispers, shaped by the muses, and sung by a mortal heart that dared to dream. The moon had slipped behind a veil of clouds, leaving the halls of muses draped in shadow. Outside, wind whispered through marble colonnades, carrying a hush that seemed to steal breath itself. Melanion stood alone on the broad terrace overlooking the valley below, clutching his lyre as if it were a lifeline. Though he had triumphed, with his final composition, an undercurrent of dread pulsed beneath his triumph, a warning he had dared not ignore. Earlier that evening, the night's calm had shattered when Polyhymnia, muse of silent devotion, had appeared in his chamber. Her eyes, deep with sorrow and resolve, had held his gaze as she spoke. You have woven light and shadow into a masterpiece, but you have yet to confront the price of sound. Even gods pay tribute for mortal glory. Be wary. Silence can be both balm and curse. Now, as Melanion traced the silver runes along his lyre's frame, He felt that price stirring. The instrument's polished wood gleamed in the faint torchlight, but its strings, once alive with promise, now lay slack, silent. He plucked one string. It gave only a hollow snap, as though his gift itself recoiled. A low murmur drifted from the temple doors. He pressed a fingertip to his lips, an unconscious plea. From the threshold emerged Thalia, muse of prayerful contemplation, her veil trailing like mist. In her hand, she carried a small obsidian chalice. Its surface absorbed the torchlight, turning it into a pool of night. "Drink," she whispered, voice soft as distant bells. "And speak the words you fear." Melandian hesitated. He knew that every gift the muses bestowed carried a measure of sacrifice. The chalice brimmed with waters drawn from Polyhymnia's own sacred spring. Waters that granted clarity but demanded penance. He lifted it to his lips and drank. The liquid slid cold and silent down his throat, leaving an echoing hush in his chest. Thalia watched, tears glinting in her eyes. The curse of silence lies not in losing sound, but in losing voice, losing the truth of your heart beneath the weight of expectation. Before he could respond, the lyre in his arms trembled. A single note, fragile as moth's wing, escaped. It quivered, then faded into absolute silence. Melandian looked down in alarm. The runes had dimmed, and his hands felt numb to touch. Behind him, the night wind stilled. The terrace's shadows deepened into shapes, faces half-formed, neither fully human nor divine, pressing just beyond the stone balustrade. Melandian turned, heart pounding, and saw the 9 muses emerge in a spectral circle. Calliope, Clio, Euterpe, Thalia, Melpomene, Terpsichore, Erato, Polyhymnia, and Urania. Their faces were grave. Calliope stepped forward, voice echoing in the tense air. "Melandian, composer of unity, you have sung the world's song, yet you have not yet reconciled with the silence at the core of creation. To master your art, you must endure the quiet between notes." He swallowed, voice trembling. "I do not fear silence, only the loss of my purpose." Clio held up a scroll. "History is written both in sound and in silence. Omit either, and the tale is broken. You must choose. Continue to wield the lyre's voice at the cost of your own silence, or surrender its music to preserve your words." Melandian's breath stuttered. The silvery garland of the muses still crowned his head. His robes gleamed with divine blessing. Yet he realized that the gift he prized most was not the thunderous chorus of his final composition, but the simple act of speaking truth. Euterpe reached out, her flute's melody echoing faintly in her fingers. "Play for us one note," she said, "and let it be the note of your own heart." He raised the lyre, but his fingers hovered above the strings, unable to summon courage. The chalice's waters had rooted him to a deeper truth, that every song must be born from silence, and the greatest silence is the one we carry within. Urania stepped beside him, lifting a star-glass lens to his eye. Through it, he saw his own reflection, no longer the triumphant composer, but a man caught between realms, mortal longing and immortal expectation. Her voice was gentle, but firm. "To break the curse of silence, you must speak your name aloud, claim your story, with all its flaws and fears." Melandian's throat tightened. He had sacrificed his childhood memories to forge the eternal flame. He had offered his voice to the muses' gifts. Now, they demanded he reclaim his own name. He closed. His eyes inhaled the night air scented with jasmine and incense, and found his voice. Soft at first, then growing in resonance, he spoke. "I am Melandian of the willow's glade. I am the whisper in the reeds, the echo in the hall, the soul that binds note to silence. I reclaim my voice, not for glory, but for truth." As the words fell into the night, a gentle tremor rippled through the terrace. His lyre, once slack and lifeless, hummed to life. One string glowed with inner light, then another awakened beneath his finger. A bird's soft trill emerged, then a rising chord that resonated like dawn's first breath. The spectral muses smiled, their forms brightening. Calliope nodded in approval. You have honored the quiet between notes. Your voice and your silence are now one. Polyhymnia stepped forward, pressing a single finger to her lips. Remember this moment. Every melody must rest in silence, and every silence holds the seed of song. With a chorus of whispers, the muses faded into the night air. The faces at the balustrade dissolved, leaving only the stars above. Milanian stood alone, chalice in hand, lyre glowing at his side, and a sense of peace settling in his chest. He struck a single note, pure, clear, and charged with the weight of truth and memory. It lingered in the air, echoing across the valley below. Then he closed his eyes, savoring the silence that followed, knowing that in that hush lay the promise of every song yet unwritten. Thus was the curse of silence broken, not by might or magic, but by the courage to speak one's own name and embrace the silence within. And as the first light of dawn touched the terrace, Milanian stepped back into the Hall of Muses, ready to compose anew with voice and silence unbound. A chill, dawn mist clung to the forest floor as Milanian emerged from the Hall of Muses, lyre in hand and heart brimming with renewed purpose. The world beyond those hallowed halls seemed both familiar and transformed. Bird calls carried new harmonies, tree trunks resonated with forgotten refrains, and the very air thrummed with latent possibility. Today's task surpassed any mortal composition. He would forge the song beyond flesh, a melody to transcend the barrier between mortality and divinity. He followed a winding path through ancient oaks whose gnarled branches curled skyward like supplicants. At the glade's center lay a crystal-clear pool fed by subterranean springs, its surface so still that it mirrored the heavens. This was the Well of Echoes, said to hold the whispers of every soul who had ever sung. Here, Milanian would bind his final composition to the very essence of life and spirit. He knelt at the pool's rim, placing the lyre beside him. In one hand, he held a quill tipped with stardust from Urania's lens. In the other, Demeter's dew, water gathered from the first harvest moon, gifted by Polyhymnia herself. With measured care, he dipped the quill into the dew and etched 3 runes on the lyre's soundbox: the rune of spirit, the rune of memory, and the rune of transcendence. Each glowed softly, as though accepting the pact. As he completed the glyphs, the Well of Echoes stirred. Tiny ripples radiated outward, and faint voices rose, snippets of ancient hymns, lost lullabies, and half-forgotten chants. Milanian closed his eyes, allowing those spectral strains to weave into his consciousness. They spoke of love and loss, of birth and decay, of the fragile spark that flickers in every heart. He plucked a single string, and the well responded, a cascade of notes that intertwined with his own, shimmering like sunlight on water. Encouraged, he lifted the lyre to his chest and began to play the prelude of becoming, a soft, undulating motif that traced the arc of life's first breath. The notes melded with the pool's echo, rising in gentle swells and falls, as though the well itself breathed in time with his melody. Next came the chorus of remembering. Drawing on Clio's gift, he wove into the strain the weight of memory, ancient wars and distant loves, each note a shard of history. The air grew dense with remembrance. Leaves trembled in reverence, and small woodland creatures paused their dawn songs to listen. Melpomene's touch added a bittersweet undertone. Sorrow for what was lost, gratitude for what once was. Strengthening his resolve, Milanian transitioned to the bridge of transcendence. Here, he invoked Apollo's light and Hermes' cunning, His fingers danced across the strings in rapid arpeggios, conjuring images of wings unfurling, embers igniting, and stars coalescing. The melody soared, lifting beyond mortal reach, and for an instant, the glade trembled under the sheer force of its ascent. But he did not stop there. He folded in the interlude of union, a section taught by Erato and Terpsichore, graceful counterpoints that blended love's tenderness with dance's vivacity. The well of echoes glowed beneath the surface, its ripples pulsing in harmony. Milanian felt his own spirit expand, as though every boundary between himself and creation dissolved. Finally, he prepared the coda of immortality, a sequence of 9 resolute chords, each corresponding to one of the muses. With each chord, a pillar of light rose from the pool: violet for Calliope, indigo for Clio, silver for Euterpe, gold for Thalia, deep crimson for Melpomene, emerald for Terpsichore, rose for Erato, ivory for Polyhymnia, and sapphire for Urania. Those pillars intertwined above the well, forming an arch of prismatic radiance. Melandian closed his eyes and struck the first chord with deliberate force. The sound rippled outward, merging with the well's depths. He moved through each subsequent, chord without pause, his spirit lending unwavering clarity to every note. As the final chord rang, a wave of pure light surged upward, carrying the melody beyond the treetops into the dawn sky. In that moment, mortal and divine stood equal witness. The well of echoes fell silent, its surface solidifying into a perfect mirror. The pillars of light dissolved into motes of brilliance that drifted like fireflies toward the horizon, each carrying a fragment of the song beyond flesh, a promise of unity between worlds. Melandian opened his eyes to find a figure waiting. By the pool's edge, Calliope, her countenance serene. "You have done what few could even dare envision," she said. "The song beyond flesh bridges the chasm between mortality and divinity. Mortals who hear even a single motet of your melody shall glimpse the immortal spark within their souls. Gods who perceive its echo will feel the warmth of human hearts." As dawn's first rays gilded the canopy, the other muses emerged in silent procession. They each laid a hand upon Melanian's shoulder, their touch suffusing him with abiding grace. Clio nodded. "Your composition is now etched in both song and spirit," Polyhymnia whispered, "and in silence, its resonance endures." Urania gazed skyward, adding, "Let its light guide constellations yet to be charted." Melandian bowed his head, tears of awe glimmering in his eyes. He had woven a melody that transcended flesh, memory, and time, binding mortal aspiration with divine essence. In his grip, the lyre now pulsed with inner fire, a living testament to the unity of all creation. With a final, reverent glance at the well of echoes, Melanian turned from the glade. Every step he took carried the echo of that transcendent song, softly weaving through forests, over mountains, and into the hearts of all who would listen. Thus, the song beyond flesh journeyed into legend, a bridge of melody uniting earth and Olympus in an eternal harmony. As dawn's first glow swept across the horizon, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting in that sacred interlude between night and day for the echoes of 3 extraordinary lives to ripple outward. Over the jagged peaks of Sparta, through the hallowed groves of Olympus, and across the whispering willows of Melanian's glade, a single thread of flame and song wove its way into every corner of mortal and divine alike. We began with Arion, the son of fire, born beneath storm-tossed skies, raised at the anvil's roar, and tempered in the crucible of Hades itself. He stole the eternal flame, bartered away his name and memories in exchange for power, and returned to his mother's cottage forever changed. Yet it was not brute strength or bloodline that defined him, but the choice to wield his gift with compassion, to forge life from flame rather than destruction. In every spark he coaxed to life, Arion's journey reminds us that true mastery demands both sacrifice and humility, and that the brightest fire can illuminate the darkest night. Then came Leonthe, Sparta's legendary shield maiden, whose heart beat not only to the rhythm of war, but to the mournful hymn of a swan. In moonlit groves, she met Apollo, exiled into feathered form, and found in him a tenderness that rivaled her fiercest valor. Their love defied Zeus's thunderous decree, bore the mark of divine favor and trial, and endured under an eternal vigil at the goddess's temple. Through Leonthe's loyalty and silent devotion, we learn that courage extends beyond the battlefield, that the fiercest warrior may wield her sword to protect not only states, but the fragile bonds of the heart. Finally, there was Melanien, the mortal bard chosen by all 9 muses to carry their gifts in his fingertips. From the whispers by the willow to the song beyond flesh, he wove the world's joys and sorrows into melodies that bridged realms. He faced the curse of silence to reclaim his own voice, composed a final composition that united triumph and lament, and then bound his work to the well of echoes so that every soul, mortal and god, might hear the immortal spark within. Melanien teaches us that art is more than beauty. It is the architecture of empathy, the vessel that carries memory and hope across generations. Each of these stories stands alone in its power, yet together they form a grand tapestry of sacrifice, devotion, and creation. They challenge us to ask, what flame do you carry within your own heart? Will you forge it into instruments of compassion, or leave it to flicker and fade? What silent longings lie beneath your armor? Longings that may only answer when you dare to listen. And what song waits, just beyond the border of your own courage, ready to echo across lifetimes if you but give it voice? If Arian's journey stoked your curiosity about the price of power, if Leonthe's loyalty stirred your own dormant devotion, or if Melanien's melodies awakened the artist in you, then I invite you to lean in closer. Share in the comments which sacrifice moved you most, which moments sparked something within your soul, and what choices you, like these heroes, might make when destiny calls. Don't forget to like this video if you believe that stories of fire, of love, of song have the power to transform us. Subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next journey into myth's hidden corners. And if you're hungry for more, check out the playlist linked right here for untold legends, waiting to ignite your imagination. Until next time, may your own flame burn bright, your heart remain steadfast, and your song resound beyond flesh.